welcome everybody. So glad you could join us for our first artist talk event of 2021 for the Tallgrass Artist Residency. Yay! Areca Roe is our resident artist with us today. So we'll hear from her in just a moment. I wanted to quickly welcome everyone and introduce myself. I'm Kelly Yarbrough. I'm the lead administrator for the Tallgrass Artist Residency Program. This is our 6th year of doing the residency. We are funded by the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission, and we work very closely with the community of Matfield Green and the organization of Matfield Green Works. We host around 10 artists in residence every year. This year we actually have 11 artists coming through. They come from across the country, across the Prairie region, and we have an eco-region exchange artist that comes to visit the Prairie every year. And this year we are also doing a special collaboration with the Ulrich Museum in Wichita. They are hosting 2 visiting artists from Canada who will actually be making a stop through Matfield Green later this summer as well. That's kind of a new thing. But each of our residents that comes through stays for about 2 weeks in Matfield Green, but they each give a public program of some kind during their time. So Areca is going to be speaking with us today, and we will have a number of other artist events coming up this summer. So please stay up to date with us on our website, on Facebook, on Instagram, and you can join our mailing list to learn about those upcoming events. And I do want to plug that we actually have a really big, exciting event at the end of our seasonal cycle happening on Saturday, October 2nd. We bring all of the artists from this year and this time from 2020, because we didn't do it in 2020. We bring all the artists back together at once to do kind of a symposium event and group exhibition. And this is going to be happening all in Matfield Green this year. So it's going to be a full day of really wonderful art and community. So put that date on your calendar and come see us in Matfield Green. I do want to mention too, real quick, that this particular artist talk is kind of co-hosted with our friends at Kanza Prairie because of Areca's special work. Before I introduce Areca and where she is coming from, I want to quickly introduce Jill Hokus, who's on the call from Kanza Prairie. Jill, do you want to say hi and just briefly tell us what you do there?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. So I'm the Director of Education here at Kanza Prairie, and I see lots of names that I recognize. So thank you guys for crossing the borders and following both art and science of our community. And we've been partnering with Areca, and thank you for telling me how to say her name. I apologize for mispronouncing it, with her special project. So I can't wait to see some of the things that she shows us and talks about today. And I'm happy to help spread the news of the science and art of the Prairie of our community. That's one of the things that we all have in common. So thank you, Kelly, for letting us be part of this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jill. And I hope, Areca, that maybe you can mention later on too a little bit more about the LTER system and what that is and that connection. I think you probably will. If you don't, I'll ask you about it because this is a Q&A.
A little bit, but probably Jill is more of an expert on the LTER network than me.
Well, it's a good connection. So just to briefly introduce Areca here before turning it over to her. Areca Roe is an assistant professor of photography and video at Minnesota State University in Mankato, Minnesota. She works in various media though, including video, sculpture, and installation. She loves to explore sort of the interface between natural and human domains and environments in her work. She was her application, I will say, to this program particularly stuck out because of some of her really fascinating video and photography work focusing on field researchers. And, you know, her work is very strong and was intriguing to the jury, but we'll also say that Areca wasted no time in following up and making contacts with researchers both at Kanza and at the Tallgrass Preserve. So it's been really fun to help her make those connections and support her work. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. I'll turn it over to you, Areca. I know you're going to speak a little bit about your some of your past work, current work. I would remind everyone that we are grateful to hear from the artists. This is sort of an in-progress check-in. They're not asked to do a formal presentation, but we'll hear a bit from Areca and then we'll open it up to Q&A and have a nice little dialogue. So thank you for being here, Areca.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for helping me make those connections to researchers. And I'll definitely share some of those pictures that are in progress that I've taken here and that I've taken in the past in that project. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And start presenting here. Yeah, so thanks again. Everyone at Matfield Green has been really welcoming. So thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Philip. Derek is not on the call, but Derek and Catherine. I think I've met like at least 10% of the population of Matfield Green, and they're all amazing. And Bill and Julia, who own this bunkhouse where I'm staying. And yeah, thank you, Kelly and Jill, for hosting me here. I had heard about this residency and been intrigued by it for many years. After researching a little bit more, I decided to apply and pursue this project that I've been working on for a couple of years that I'll show you. But if you don't know anything about Matfield Station, this is the bunkhouse where artists and residents stay. It's a wonderful place right in the middle of this prairie that Bill and Julia have helped keep going. It's really a stunning prairie. It's like quality prairie here. And the bunkhouse is right next to the train track, so you might hear trains go by. They go by fairly often. And it used to house railroad workers, which is a fascinating history. And that's my view from the bunkhouse or from the prairie. Lots of beautiful sunsets. I'll talk a little bit about me and my practice. As Kelly mentioned, I'm from Minnesota, also South Dakota. I grew up in eastern South Dakota, which is very, very much the plains. Would have been tallgrass prairie, and Mankato is in an area that would have also been tallgrass prairie, although there's not much left, of course. And also spent a lot of time in Minneapolis. So I'm rooted in Minnesota. And a lot of my work, as Kelly mentioned, also is about our relationship to the natural world, our culture's relationship, our individual relationships to the natural world, and how that manifests in various ways. And one reason I'm interested in that is because my previous studies as an undergraduate, I studied biology with a specific interest in ecology, and worked in that realm for a while and thought about pursuing that more seriously as a researcher. But art kept calling me back. I've been obsessed with photography for much of my life. So I just kept kind of going back to art and photography and ended up pursuing that. But also, I feel like the grounding in biology and ecology really informs a lot of my work and enriches my life, of course. And I'll come back to this as well, but Cedar Creek Long-Term Ecological Research Station, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but I became interested in prairies while I was there as an undergraduate. I was an intern identifying prairie plants, basically, for a couple of summers at Cedar Creek. So, became really familiar with prairie plants while I was there, helping out with this ecological research. So that's kind of my part of how I ended up here in the prairie. Um, Oh yeah, so just a little bit more about Matfield Station. There's all these paths that Bill and Julia have maintained, and sculptures as well. Bill is a sculptor. So one of the wonderful things about this residency has just been me wandering around these paths. I've been up to the Konza Prairie. I've been to the Tallgrass Prairie several times, and to Matfield Green. But a lot of time just spent wandering around this area, and I feel like it's really reawakened this part of my brain that really wants to know prairie plants, because I've forgotten a lot of them. And I used to be a birder, and for several years haven't really done that. And so it also reawakened that part of my brain. I was walking around with binoculars trying to identify birds. And so that's been a really wonderful part of this residency, just having that time, in this area, in nature all the time, pretty much. And yeah, I feel like my life is enriched when I know a little bit about the specific birds and plants that are around me. I feel like it just enriches my experience and kind of helps me understand the area a little bit more, understand the ecology. So yeah, if you haven't ever come to Matfield Station, come and look at the sculptures and the prairie paths. It's, like I said, it's top quality prairie. It's really good prairie. Yeah, so Cindy yesterday from Matfield Green kindly drove me around in the back roads, because I don't know if my car would be able to handle some of those roads. And so this was one of the views that we stopped at. It's just gorgeous here, as many of you all know. There's just like a quiet, steady beauty to it, just the vastness of the landscape. I'm going to dive into some older work and talk about how that threads into the current work that I'm doing. I've done a lot of different projects. I tend to jump around a lot and like concentrate on one project and then another. And sometimes there's connections and sometimes not. The other day, a researcher that I was photographing for the project that I'm going to talk about further asked me about my interest in textiles and in patterns that I've been incorporating. And I had to think about it, but I realized it came back to this series that I did called Housebroken. And I did this from 2012 to 2015. And I was photographing unusual pets in their domestic environments. So basically not cats and dogs, because I feel like I have an understanding of that relationship. It seems reciprocal. It's quite common. But I didn't necessarily understand the urge to have a relationship with a snake or a pig, where they're living in your house. It's a very intimate relationship. So I was interested in that interplay between the natural world, animals specifically, and us, and how we're kind of trying to create this relationship. So pot-bellied pigs. This pig was very sweet. This is an Angora rabbit. And so when I was photographing in these homes, I kept sort of unconsciously, but maybe purposefully, including a lot of the domestic textiles in the background. And I felt that it was interesting how they echoed with the animals. It almost became a landscape, or sometimes the animals almost looked like they were camouflaged or blending into the landscape of this domestic sphere. So like in this one, the pillows, they were just set up like that. They looked like a desert landscape to me in a way. And like the wood in the background, there's tons of wood surrounding this gigantic snake. Or the stripes on the tablecloth somehow seemed to echo the stripes on this tarantula. So it was kind of happenstance, but when I noticed it, I definitely appreciated having that interplay between the tension between the animal and the textiles. Or, these turtles crawling around on this kind of swampy looking green. So I think that fed into the current project that I'm doing. And yeah, I wanted to just come back to talking a little bit about Cedar Creek because that's part of the reason why I'm here. So Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve is a long-term ecological research station, much like Konza Prairie. And what you see in this aerial view is prairie plots. So those are different combinations of prairie plants studying biodiversity. It is north of the Twin Cities, about a 45-minute drive. And so I tried to kind of circle where it is here. Because one thing I think that's interesting about Minnesota and about that area specifically is it's kind of on the edge of a lot of biomes. So on the lower left is what would have been prairie, tallgrass prairie, and is mostly agricultural now. And on the upper right is deciduous, or not, sorry, not deciduous, coniferous and boreal forest. And then there's this stripe of deciduous in the middle. And so Cedar Creek has all of those biomes within it, which is really interesting. Prairie, savanna, it has a tamarack bog, cedar forest. Yeah, so it was a fun place to work. And also I came back as a artist in residence many years after my undergraduate experience there, which was really wonderful and satisfying to be able to come back as an artist in residence there. And the project that I wanted to do, and I did a couple different projects. I tend to work on multiple projects at once, but the one that began there that I continued here is, I've been calling it Laboratory. It's portraits of ecological researchers in the field. So this is Callie. She studies prairie and oak savannas and how they're affected by elevated carbon dioxide. And she also leads a cadre of undergraduate interns. So she helps coordinate a whole bunch of research there. And so for this project, I collaborated with the researcher, and usually they chose the location. Often it was where they were doing their work, or sometimes it was just a place that they had a strong affinity to in the park in Cedar Creek. And I also had them choose, I have a collection of fabrics, nature themed, nature patterned fabrics. And so I had them choose one of those, and then I would try to incorporate it, sort of like this hint at the domestic, or the hint at the interplay between the human and natural environment. And often I would have them choose a favorite prairie plant as well. So I have Callie holding a prairie plant, and I can't remember which one it is now. Penstemon, I think. So, and I've also, I lit the images with extra light, so they look kind of elevated. And that was part of what I wanted to do. Here's Caitlin. Jill had mentioned knowing Caitlin. And she studies wildlife distribution and movement patterns and education and science. I feel like that's important in a way to talk about what the research is. So I wanted to sort of put a human face on this idea of science. So I feel like it's intimidating to a lot of people and seems sort of like this monolithic idea. But there are humans doing the ecological science out here. So I was interested in that. And also just kind of like holding them up as these important workers who are trying to tease apart the connections between the living and non-living landscape, trying to figure out how our world works, how ecology works. And it can be really hard work. So I was interested in sort of elevating them. And I think part of it is also I was just interested in hanging out with researchers. I just enjoy learning about their research. You know, I'm curious about what drives them. Just curious about what their research is, what they are finding. A lot of the researchers I collaborated with were grad students, postdocs, and a few undergrads as well. Partly that just was who was around a lot and who was out in the field. And I also was kind of interested in, you know, this younger generation of researchers and how and why they're getting into this field. And it just seemed kind of hopeful, I think. So this is Azad. He was an undergraduate researcher, and he was interested in prairie ecology, and he was really interested in wolf populations as well. This is Karina. She studied seed banks and how climate change affects plant phenology. Phenology is the timing of plant events, like when they bloom and things like that. And this was one of the plots she worked in. It's a stand of planted birches, I believe. And so it was interesting because this is often where she would be. She'd be down on the ground doing surveys or weeding or things like that. April studies red-headed woodpecker populations in Minnesota, which there's not a whole lot of red-headed woodpeckers there. So that was part of why she was researching that. Grace studies bird population trends in Minnesota as a result of climate change. And a lot of these folks do study things having to do with climate change, which I think is very, very interesting. Christy studies how to increase biodiversity in recovering grasslands and prairies. So croplands that are becoming prairies again, how do you increase the biodiversity and make them stronger prairies? Sarah also studies red-headed woodpecker populations. The textiles, I felt like it was also sort of a challenge to myself to sort of figure out how to incorporate them into the scene. And sometimes there seemed like a natural way to do it. Sometimes, sometimes I don't know if it works super well, but it's a thread that connects to a lot of my other work as well. So I'm including those textiles in all the images. Chad studies bison. Craig, mycorrhizal fungi. Janine studies mice, small mammals, and parasites within those wild populations. So it's just a huge variety. I think it's so interesting. And all these folks are doing research at Cedar Creek. Carmen, prairie and oak, or prairie and savanna biomes. And that brings me to here. And I've had the great pleasure of connecting with several researchers at the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve and also at Konza Prairie. So I'll share some of those images. This is Peter. He studies the conservation of populations of the endangered Topeka shiner, which I'd never heard of a Topeka shiner before. And so it was, again, just really wonderful to get to know these researchers and get to know what they're studying. And he's a graduate student at KSU. And another great thing about doing this project, getting to hang out with researchers, but also they often will bring me to these places that I never would have come upon otherwise. If I was walking around the Tallgrass Prairie, this is kind of off the path, I probably would not have found this like beautiful creek and willow. Peter said he often would stop and eat lunch at this spot. So yeah, we coordinated, and he was game for posing, and I love that he's wearing his waders too, and his cowboy hat. And so we hung this fabric in the tree, and he remarked that it almost seemed like flood debris, and he pointed out like a few like strands of grass that are high up in the tree from floods. He said the floods can get really high, like above his head where they are. So I thought that was an interesting connection. So this is at Konza Prairie. Katie studies grassland songbird population ecology. And again, it was really cool to see her area where she does research. It was, she had to come get me in her truck because my car wouldn't have made it on this road. And she brought me to this place where she does her research, and it's just stunningly beautiful. Kate also studies conservation of native fish populations in Kansas. And this is in Konza Prairie, and it's right off the trail. So some of you might recognize it if you've hiked that trail on Kings Creek, I think it's called. And it's so one interesting thing about the landscape here, of course, is that there's flint everywhere. So this you wouldn't really see this kind of creek in Minnesota. It's it's definitely unfamiliar to me to have this really rocky creek. So I thought that was really beautiful. James studies soil microbiology and soil health. And he was really fun to work with. He had lots of ideas about how to incorporate this fabric. And that's also at Konza Prairie near his research site. And this is at the Tallgrass Preserve. And Denise studies grassland bird populations in winter and migration. And again, she had this tree in mind. She'd photographed it before, and it's just this giant cottonwood that was near where she studies the birds. So we hiked in. It was like a mile of hiking through sort of like a off the beaten path trail. And so it was cool to just go to this location I would not have otherwise. So it's been a really fun project to get to know these researchers, to get to know their plots where they do their work. I've got a couple more planned for at Kansa, which is really exciting. So I feel like it's been really successful as far as making connections with researchers. And I'll definitely take any and all questions, but I wanted to share one last thing that I did here. This is not here, this is in Alaska, but it kind of leads up to what I was going to share. A few years ago, I had a chance to photograph in Alaska, and I ended up bringing a 360-degree camera, which takes video or photos in 360 degrees. And what I enjoy doing with that kind of video is flattening it out into an orb. And so for this video, I'll share it. It might be kind of choppy, but you'll get the idea. I was having the camera kind of go up and down within the canopy of this boreal forest. So I'll go ahead and share that just for a moment. It's short. And there isn't any sound, so. So what I loved about that was how up close it gets to a lot of the plants and how it kind of changes as you go up and down within like down to the ground level and then up into the canopy. And you kind of feel like you're a bug. We call that the worm's eye view in photography. So I did at Cedar Creek, when I was artist in residence there, I did a few 360-degree videos where I called it transect, and I was taking these ribbons that you use for marking transects for studying ecology. And I also took flags and kind of wound those around the landscape. So I'm not going to show the videos, but just a couple of stills. So I ended up doing like a variety of different colors and for those videos. So I didn't really have anything in mind for here, but I brought my 360 camera. So I just wanted to share the video that I took. And again, it's kind of in progress. I don't really know what I'm going to do with it, but I'll share it. There is some sound, but if you don't hear it, it's not going to be terribly important. Oh, there's a train coming through right now. That'll add to it. And I will end there. And I see a couple of questions in the chat, which I'm happy to answer, but are there questions?
Thank you so much, Areca. That was awesome. Love that. I did notice a couple questions in the chat. The first one I saw was related to the fabric, and I want to piggyback off of that too. I think it is fascinating to see the different ways that you manipulate and use the fabric in the different images. I mean, some are, you know, we might recognize them as textile patterns on furniture. Some were treated more as props or as backgrounds as in a classic painting, and some were wrapped almost around like trees and trunks. So I guess I'm curious to know more about how you use that fabric choice, if that is you, if that's part of the collaboration with your subject. And I think the specific question in the chat was, how do you choose the patterns on the fabric? What attracts you to those certain patterns?
Mm-hmm. I have kind of a collection. I just go to Joann Fabrics and look in the clearance area basically and find things. A lot of it has to do with color or how it feels, like how it flows. And I've been trying to stick to things that are nature themed, so and primarily like floral or plant based, although I do have some that have sort of like an animal on them. And I give the choice. I send the images to the researcher and ask them to choose one, because I want to have them collaborate and have it be something that they would, I don't want to put them with a fabric that they hate, basically. So a lot of it is their choice. And, originally I'm finding things at the fabric store. Sometimes I'll, pick up curtains or something like that if I find a cool pattern. But yeah, I think the colors often drive my decision making. Yeah, great question.
Thank you. If anyone in the audience has a question, you are welcome to unmute and speak up.
I have another question. I noticed that your subjects rarely are looking at you. They're not looking, they're becoming part of their landscape. Is that what you're going for? Are you trying to sneak in on them while they're while they're doing their thing, but you're modifying it with the fabrics, but still as a photographer, they're not paying any attention to you. So you're like this unseen part of the composition, but you're obviously there. Is that what you're going for?
Yeah, I do direct them to not look at the camera. And I think that I do want it to be sort of like I'm entering on this scene. I think that's a good point. I've been thinking about paintings and like how they might be with the lighting and whatnot. I feel like it elevates it to a way where it almost looks like a classical painting, and some of them, not all of them. So I feel like I also am asking them not to look at the camera to sort of mimic these, paintings that I've been looking at. Yeah, great question though. I do direct them to not look at the camera and to not smile too.
I feel like that almost kind of adds to this surrealism of the scene too. I mean, I'm glad that you shared the previous, the Housebroken. That was the name of the series from before, because you're posing, you're creating these environments that are a little bit odd or out of place, but like you couldn't tell a pig to look at the camera or not too. So there was this element of like documenting a scene as you found it. Okay. Interesting. Tony, yes.
What would be your research or your emphasis while you're there doing your residency? What will you be working on?
Primarily the portraits. So I've been collaborating with the researchers and meeting them at the Tallgrass Prairie and the Konza Prairie. So that's primarily it. And then also just kind of absorbing the area. I should say I haven't spent time in Kansas before. I've driven through like many folks, but I have not spent time here. So this is my first experience being in the Flint Hills.
And Areca's been here for, it's been like a week, maybe a little less at this point.
A little
So-
more, actually.
Oh,
Yeah. I think it's day 8, maybe.
okay, yeah. And you shared quite a number of images. I'm sure you've taken tons more, but Tony, I think those images that she shared from the Tallgrass Preserve in Konza are all things that she's done since she's been here.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So I've met with 5 researchers so far, and I've got a couple more planned. Hopefully those will pan out.
I have one. I'm curious, what is the connection between your video work, which I thought was just fascinating, that I don't understand how you do that, but the one with the train that was going around at the end, and there's no people in that, and then the series with your researchers, and there's people in that. I'm wondering if you see, if you're interested in very different things in those 2 media, or if you're sort of interested in the same thing.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of both, I think. Definitely interested in like the landscapes and the plants. Like I'm just in love with the prairie plants. So I love in that video, like you get so up close to them. But I feel like those are less about the relationship between humans and the landscape, the ones where it's without people. It's more just about appreciating the plants that are there and kind of experiencing it as a bug or as a worm in a way. Whereas the research photos definitely are about the people and about their relationship to the landscape. So it's a little bit different. Yeah. Great question.
Areca, we've got, and you may know this, we've got an event this Sunday. It's the Friends of Konza Prairie Wildflower Walk. I hope you and the rest of the crew here in the audience plan on coming out. The weather forecasts are saying that the sun will come back and it will warm up. And so with all that water and sun, we should have tons of flowers. Plus, we're out there at sunset, so it might make for some really beautiful photos if you come out and join us.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw a sign for that. That looks great.
You could photograph. I don't think Kelly's are you going to be there, Kelly? No, she's going to be out of town.
Yeah.
I'm also going to be gone by then, but.
Oh, are you going to be gone by then?
Yeah.
Oh, no. You can come out any day this week and we'll go out and look at flowers if you want. Go look at plants.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's just, like I said, been such a wonderful thing to do here. I, usually don't have the time to spend so much time wandering around prairies and looking at plants. So it's been really meditative and great. Looking at the chat to see if there's other questions. Anybody else have other questions?
I'm kind of curious to know if you've ever thought about what you would choose as your environment if you were going to be photographed like your subjects. I know maybe you haven't done the biology piece in a while, but if that's part of your background, I'm just curious to know if you've ever seen yourself in that way.
I'm kind of obsessed with the boreal forest and with bogs, so I think that would probably be it. They're just like such otherworldly places. So yeah, I'm definitely drawn to that.
Bogs are crazy.
And there's a lot in northern Minnesota, like boreal forest, tamarack bogs. But they have like pitcher plants and sundew plants, like these carnivorous plants, which is wild as well. and that you just see plants there you'd never see anywhere else, and it just feels different. It's cool.
Maybe you could also tell us what a boonie cruise is.
Yes. I love that term, boonie cruise. Yeah, so Cindy from Matfield Green kindly took me on a boonie cruise out into the boonies. It's really cool to just drive around this area. It's so sparsely populated that you can just be out there and you don't see any houses, any buildings for miles and miles, just pastures and cows. And yeah, we went yesterday and it was kind of like a misty, rainy day. It's perfect. Yeah, I loved it. It was fantastic. And that is kind of like a special thing about this area, is that you can get out in the boonies. You can get out really far and kind of just like feel the landscape around you. Other questions? And feel free to ask technical questions as well, about how I do things. I'll tell you how I do the videos of going up and down in the canopy, the one from Alaska and the one that was from here, because it's kind of funny, I think. So I have this 360 camera, and of course, if I'm in the scene, or if I'm holding the camera, I'm in the scene, and I don't want to be. So what I've been doing is putting it on a fishing line and draping that over a pulley, like a pulley of a branch, just like making a branch into a pulley, and then I hide behind the grass and like pull it up and down from afar, so I'm not in the scene. So it goes up and down with this little fishing line. So it's not very not very technically complicated, but kind of fun.
I feel like there's a real ingenuity though that artists and scientists have in common, field scientists especially, because if you're out at Kanza and you know there's like hundreds of experiments happening there at any given time, and you might see these like odd sort of setups in the environment and you're not quite sure what's going on there. Maybe you recognize some object that you can find at like a dollar store that's being used in some special way because they make it work. They figure it out, they make it work. And I feel like that's very akin to what artists do sometimes as well.
Yeah, Peter, who does fish research, was telling me that he and his crew had made their own antennas to kind of detect these fish that have tags on them, because the antennas were like thousands of dollars if you bought them. And he's like, well, we can just make one out of PVC pipe. And so yeah, there is a lot of that happens in science, which I think is really great. There's a lot of adjustments with PVC pipes.
That's awesome. Very cool story.
Yeah, and I one reason I wanted to do this project is because I do think that it would be great if there were more communication between the sciences and the arts, just science and visual art. I think there's a kinship there, and there could be more of a rich dialogue happening there.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I do see a question in the chat from Philip, who says, do you think your experience of having spent time here will significantly influence your work? Do you imagine you will return?
Oh, great question. Well, I'm going to come back in October. I think I will return. Maybe even to this specific bunkhouse. I've been telling my husband about it, and I think my kids would love it. So I feel like we could come back here and just like spend some time. It's hard to say how it's going to influence my work. I feel like I'm still in it, and so I can't tell. I'm sure it will kind of like change my trajectory in some ways. Like with the research project, I was so lucky to be able to photograph several researchers here. And so it kind of helps round out that project. And I've always thought that I wanted to have 3 different locations. So I feel like I've got Minnesota and Kansas, and now I might try and go for a 3rd location and photograph some more researchers. So yeah, I feel like that project has really been enriched by being here. And just, I think my own life has been enriched by being here, for sure.
That's wonderful to hear. And I will say too, just from the residency perspective, we pretty intentionally try to resist asking residents to create anything specific while they're here, or we don't dictate how they should spend their time or whatnot. And I think that is really important. There's a lot of transactional exchange in our world, and I think the community of Matfield Green is so good at modeling how to preserve space and time to breathe and live well. And so I feel like we really try to preserve some of that in the residency program too. You mentioned earlier in your talk sort of I think reawakening? Reawakening, I think was the word you used. And I think that's exactly what we what we hope the artists will experience while they're here.
Yeah, that's a huge positive of the residency is the open-endedness, having time to kind of, yeah, just experience the space and the place, connect with it.
Well, there's several comments in the chat about people really appreciating your work and your focus on highlighting the researchers. People are really resonating with that. So
thank you.
Well, do we have any final questions before we wrap up here this afternoon? Okay. Yeah. Some other comments that Matfield Green as a way of getting under your skin, so it'll be interesting to see how it affects you. Yeah.
I think that's true. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking time, Areca, to share a bit about your work and to check in on where you're at these days in Matfield, and have a great rest of your residency. Thank you all so much for joining us today as well, and keep a lookout for more events on the horizon.